Well, hello again. Thank you to those of you who are sticking around. I think I'm a little too low here. Keep popping here. All right, try that a little bit better. Okay. So I'm getting a lot of time in the teacher seat over the past week, actually the past couple of weeks. I've said yes to a lot of opportunities to teach, and so in doing so, I find myself really challenging myself to both come up with material. It's not that there's a shortage of material to pick, it's about what's alive for me in my practice, and or what kind of topic could I pick and then try to make it relevant to our lives and the world, etc., and make it relevant to me such that I can at least speak in a way that I feel like I particularly feel a connection to it, you know? And when I first started first started taking the opportunities to teach in front of the group here, I decided I was going to take one of my favorite topics of all, one of my favorite bodies of practice, which is called the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. One of the Buddha's seminal teachings. It's a core of information and practices that he gave. It spans primarily two different suttas. One is called the Satipatthana Sutta. That's the one that's a little bit more elaborate. That's the one I've kind of been teaching from for the most part. And the other one is called the Anapanasati Sutta. Slightly different. It's a lot more focus on breath meditation. It condenses a lot of the activities down to four per foundation. And I was blown away when I took this class. I read the book by Joseph Goldstein called Mindfulness. And there's just nothing but genius throughout the whole of this teaching, no matter what angle you come at it from.
Yeah.
You know, could you mute something? Thanks. I could teach it, sort of like a rush teaching on sort of like, an intro, what the four foundations are. But I really wanted to lean into them one by one. Each time sit, take the group, start with mindfulness of the body, which is the first one, kaya. Mindfulness of body sensations. What is it like to be an embodied being? The second one is mindfulness of Vedana, which is a really clever way of kind of starting to investigate our emotional lives, looking at the liking and disliking, this subtle microscopic ability to make a little vote, a liking, a disliking. Yes, no, right? And then the mind, of course, has our moods, our mind states, our emotions, etc. And we can take an objective look at our emotions as well. And then the fourth one that I'm going to be talking about today is mindfulness of Dhammas. And this is arguably one of the more elaborate parts of the teaching. And when I looked at the material, I thought, okay, what am I going to talk about? And in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha kind of almost blossoms into a whole set of practices. So I'm going to probably break it up into two different talks to kind of talk about what he was suggesting for us in this teaching on mindfulness of Dhammas. The way the Buddha uses the word Dhammas here is different, I think, in the way in which we talk about the Dhamma, the Buddha's body of work. When we talk about our practice, we use the word Dhamma or Dharma. His whole body of teachings, the suttas, all the lessons there within, the body of information that he set in motion that's been with us for 2,600 years. And for this fourth foundation, he also uses the same word, Dhammas, right? These little, what he's referring to are the thought objects themselves. So consider that your thought about your body is a thought object. The Vedana, or at least your awareness of the Vedana, the liking and the disliking, is also a Dhamma. So it's an object of the mind. Your mood and the mind state, it's an object of the mind. If your mind is wandering and you're thinking about those chocolate croissants they have at the bakery up on Foster, right? That's a thought object, right? The croissant. There's also the desire, etc. And so when he gets to the Dhammas, there's this long list of different ways, different perspectives that we can take for looking at our minds. And instead of us kind of locking into the thoughts themselves, we can lock into the thought. The thing about mindfulness of thoughts is that we have a tendency to kind of proliferate the thought. We may find ourselves running down that rabbit hole again, right? Getting caught up, mind wandering, or creating a new craving or a new aversion, etc. So he gives us these perspectives, as I'm calling it, right? These different framings of what we can do when we're looking at our minds. And there's a lot of things in this sutta that he gives us. And I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to focus a little bit more on what he calls the five hindrances. But before I go into that, I'll kind of set the tone for something I find interesting about our meditative practice. We are doing something very interesting in terms of how we respond to the world, how we show up in the world when we use meditation as part of our spiritual practice, our health, our life, etc. And there's a lot of different ways to meditate. Depending on which teacher you're listening to, they may have a particular agenda in mind. If you're listening to, guiding somebody through a meditation, may or may not be the medicine you need for the moment. And but the ultimate goal here is to develop a sense of refuge, to develop a sense of peace and presence. And when we sit down, especially after a busy day or at the beginning of a potentially busy day, where there's a lot of residual emotion, perhaps the chaos of the world is weighing on you, this practice is about looking at how all of this information affects us. And it also is trying to teach us how we co-create this experience, how we respond to it. And so in the Satipatthana Sutta and the other teachings on the four foundations of mindfulness, we're taking these different perspectives. We're looking at it from this way, looking at it from that way, looking at it from the top, looking at it from the bottom, looking at it from emotions, etc. For those of you sitting in the room, right? Nobody's sitting behind me, but that's fine. The way I appear to you looks different for each and every person, because we're all sitting with a different perspective. Joe is sitting off to my left, so he's seeing the left side of my body, right? So if he were to describe me, he would describe what he's seeing from this perspective. Jim is sitting off to my right. If he looks at me from that perspective, he's going to see me also differently, right? Different. I'm pretty even in my appearance, but it's going to look different. The lighting is different. And then, of course, there's the moods and the mind states, the thoughts that each one of them have about who I am, or our relationships as friends for a long time, right? There's this combinatorial aspect of all of these different things that we're bringing to our experience. So, I would say that there's an aspect of calming, of refuge, peace, and presence that we're making efforts towards. And then there's the reality of what our minds actually are, right? There's stress, personal stress, societal stress, you name it. And the contemplation on the five hindrances is one of the more accessible ones. It's one of the ones that I would say it's really quite foundational. It's often taught to new meditators, and it's often taught to long-standing meditators as well, because it works. It's like that practice of, whenever you go to, say, a baseball game, right? You look off in the corner, you'll see the pitcher who's not up at plate or up on the mound, is off in the corner practicing, right? They're not trying to win the game necessarily, but they're training their body-mind system to be able to consistently throw the baseball a certain way. And they're not doing anything particularly extravagant. They're just doing the same thing over and over again. It's the same exercises they were doing in high school and college, right? So there are certain things that are foundational that stick with us, and the 5 hindrances are one of these things that we can use all throughout our practice. It's also a nice simple little list, right, of different ways to look at our minds and to, again, take a different perspective. Another thing the Buddha is trying to get at in this teaching is what's known as conditionality, right? Also looking at the activity of the mind. This leads to that. If I think this, then I get caught up with that. If I think about that, then I get caught up with this, etc. So it's one thing to kind of attend to the hindrances in a way that just notices them, notices their presence. But we're also invited to look at causes and conditions. Ajahn Analayo kind of likens it to playing chess with one's own mind, right? The mind's going to do what it does, whether it's internally generated or triggered by something from the outside world. And we're just kind of watching the moves, watching what the mind does and then responding, watching what the mind does and responding. And he calls it wanting to win without getting angry, right? We're going to gently and very very deliberately, very intentionally direct our minds, but without adding anything to the experience. It could even take a sense of playfulness with it too, right? We don't have to go to war with our minds, right? No, this is what it's doing today, and you get to know how your mind works. You get to know your propensities. You get to know your personality from the inside, right? Oh, I'm prone to anger. I have short bursts of anger, so there it is again, right? There's the anger. Don't necessarily have to act on it, but just to see it, just to know. This is the truth of how this personality manifests itself in the moment. Now, like I said, there's a lot of different types of meditation out there in the world, and we could add a lot of busyness to it. A lot of busyness to it. When Joe guided us in the group-led meditation recently, one of the most beautiful phrases that he reminded us of is, nothing to do, nowhere to go, nowhere to be, right? There's a very open and expansive acceptance of what's happening. But if you read the Buddha's instructions, there's a lot of lists. There's a lot of potential for a lot of activity of the mind. So is there a lot to do? There can be a lot to do. We can do all sorts of cognitive exercises. So here we have this opportunity for looking for balance as well, right? We don't want to be too busy in our minds, but we can also be too lackadaisical and just allow ourselves to kind of stay caught up in whatever's getting us charged up. Or you can spend a lot of time doing all of your mental activities, right? You could treat the 4 foundations as a checklist. I do that. I love it, right? Get grounded in the body, right? Then what's the liking? What's the disliking? Do a lot of stuff, and then after a while, just drop it. Drop all of these exercises. Drop all of this contemplation. I don't know why I keep popping, sorry. Drop all of this contemplation. And just allow it to be as well. So it's a different kind of cognitive activity. It depends on what you want. Depends on how much distress is in the mind, right? If you want to do something about the distress, by all means, we have a lot of different things at our disposal. I also want to talk a little bit about mind wandering as well before I go into the hindrances, because it's usually mind wandering, or the hindrances are usually applied to the quality of the mind wandering. If I think about my own personal journey, about what brought me through those doors, one of the main things that brought me to meditation was learning about rumination. Between 2008 and 2012, things were very, very difficult for me in my life. And I found myself in yet another distressful job situation. My marriage was in full implosion mode. relationship with my son was pretty much non-existent. And I found myself sitting and stewing, just circular thinking, just nonstop, just can't figure my way out of this situation. I can't do this because I can't do that. I can't do that because I can't do this. I can't do this because I can't do that. And just, and the mind was just non-stop. And I caught wind of a video, or it was an article, right? It was an article. It was like a mental health article. And it was talking about the role that rumination plays in depression and anxiety. And one of the most effective ways to help untangle rumination is meditation. And so the rest is history, right? I did some online meditations and didn't really get a solid practice, but I needed some guidance. I needed to talk to a human being about this practice, and so I came through those doors at the end of 2013. Kind of didn't stop ever since. So the rumination can be very problematic, right? Especially when we find ourselves trapped in mind states that are not helpful, they're not skillful, there's a lot of negative messaging, etc. But mind wandering in and of itself is not necessarily bad. Anybody who's in the creative arts will tell you that their mind wandering is often the seed of their creative ability, just out of nowhere, seemingly nowhere. Inspirations come to mind too. We can think beautiful things as well. We can think kind thoughts. We can think creative thoughts. We can think, oh yeah, wouldn't it be great if I wrote a story about this, and then create a work of art that's inspiring and helpful and expressive. So mind wandering in and of itself can be skillful or unskillful. Now when we're in meditation, right, we can take on a tone towards our mind wandering. That mind wandering can be an aggressive, combative tone, or it can be a kind and open tone. Now, some meditative practices I've heard out there can take a tone that is very, very combative. Clearing the mind, stopping the thoughts, it depends on your personality, whether or not that works for you or not. Or the degree of the intensity with which you attend to your own thoughts. You could see it as an aggressive battle with your own mind, or you can realize that battle itself, especially for those of us who developed a bit of self-hatred over time, right? What could end up happening, unfortunately, is an additional narrative of some sort of statement about the whole of who you are, or your character of your quality, right? Or the quality of your character. And you realize, oh, I'm just propagating more internal aggression, right? David Sudar, this past year, by way of Uttejaniya, his teacher, talks about it as like, what are we adding to the experience? Are we adding more in our meditation? So perhaps the opportunity is to look at how we add to the experience and to maybe not do so. So, that's why whenever we guide in meditation, at least in particular our collective group of teachers in this particular tradition, we acknowledge that there's something to be said for the tone, even if it's the subtlest of tone in which we attend to our own mind wandering. If we're trying to go towards peace and presence, why would we add something that's not peaceful and not present? Now, I'm going to talk about the 5 hindrances real quick. During the meditation, towards the end, I spoke about each one. And the Buddha gives us a couple of guidelines for how we can attend to these things, right? They are sensual desire, right? Aversion, ill will, hatred, etc. We have sloth and torpor, sluggishness, restlessness and remorse, high energy, and then doubt and uncertainty, right? A certain level of certain quality of thought that might stop us from meditating or stop us from practicing. And they all have a different energy to them, right? Some of them are kind of high energy, some of them are kind of low energy. We have desire in one aspect and aversion in another, right? All these different trajectories of the mind. So we can notice whether they're aware, just accepting the presence of them, right? We can also notice the absence, right? If you showed up at the beginning particularly aversive, you're not feeling so great about something, right? But you notice that as you meditated, you settled in, you calmed down, the body calmed down. Then you go, well, actually, I'm not feeling quite aversive anymore, right? So you notice the absence of the aversion. We can notice when it comes up, and we can notice when we let go of it. And we can also do things to prevent the future arising. And I'll kind of talk about that as we go through these individual ones. Now, sensual desire, the Buddha's word for the first one, I've come to find out, the word he uses is kamachanda. It needs to be differentiated as such from desire. The Buddha will often talk about there's two different types of desire. There's a desire that's skillful, that leads you towards peace and presence, and there's a type of desire that leads you towards a mind that's caught up in sensual pleasures. In some books, they focus primarily on like physical attraction, sex, that kind of thing, and food, right? Probably because those are probably the two most powerful ones that we have to experience when it comes to desire. But it's not limited to food and sex by any stretch, right? It's any sort of sensual any sort of pleasure of the senses that we have in mind that's taking us away. It could be later in the day, I'm really looking forward to going on a kayak trip, right? In and of itself, there's nothing unskillful about that. It's just noticing the mind is attuning itself towards the pleasure of being on the water and the sun, etc. So just noticing what's happening in the mind. What's the desire? What kind of sense desire is in place? And the Buddha uses some visual analogies to help us unpack these. The first one has to do with water, right? So imagine if you're looking at a bowl of water, and we're trying to look into our minds. The mind is this bowl of water. But in this case, it's colored by dye, right? There's some dye in the water changing the color of it. So we can't really see, we see it, but we're not really seeing it. Which reminds me of a joke I heard about, when you first find yourself enamored with a person in a romantic way, right? The phrase goes, you see them through rose-colored glasses, right? But the joke is that the trouble with viewing a person through rose-colored glasses is that the red flags just look like flags, right? It's coloring our perception. It's changing the way in which we look at these personality traits that they have. There's something also known as the Vipassana romance. If anybody's been on retreat, perhaps you showed up at retreat, regardless of whether or not you are or are not in a relationship. Somebody catches your eye, you show up to the retreat, and suddenly, you're there. I want to get some peace, I want to get some presence, I want to drop all the details of the world, and yet that person is just rattling in your mind, and you create a very interesting fantasy world around them. And this is just a natural inclination of the mind, right? We find ourselves getting caught up with these sense desires. The antidote, right? So we can look at what it takes to prevent the future arising or to handle these things when they come up. And spoiler alert, across all 5 of these, the first one is, of course, the mindfulness. A lot of times, just the observation, oh yeah, there I am, caught up. I'm thinking about that chocolate eclair again. And we can just apply some mindfulness and just pivot, just gently pivot. Just, okay, I don't have to think about the eclair. Maybe I'll think about something else, perhaps my breath, which is what I'm here to do, right? We could think of things to counteract the desire. The Buddha talks about sensual desire. Again, we can think of this person for their attractiveness, or we can sort of unpack the reality of who they are as a very complex being with all sorts of complex body parts that some of which are not necessarily attractive, right? We can see the true humanity, what it means to be a human, and just kind of step away from this getting caught up in something that's sensual. With food, you can consider, well, yeah, I don't really need the 300 extra calories from that chocolate croissant or whatever the calorie count is. I don't really need it. That's not really good for my long-term benefit, so I'll pass this time around, So we can apply some practices. We can kind of think about our thoughts and then help right ourselves, apply some counterbalancing efforts. And there's aversion and ill will, which is the next one, right? There's, of course, this, don't want this. The analogy that the Buddha uses in this water bowl analogy is, imagine if you have a bowl of boiling water, right? You want to see into the water, but you can't because it's stirred up with all of this hot boiling water, steam coming off of it, etc. When we're heated up by anger, we're of course in a state of some sort of turbulence. There's the physical pain. A lot of us deal with chronic pain in our meditation practices, right? We're sitting with a body that might not be terribly happy about something. We have unresolved business or the dread of something in the imagined future, right? And the antidotes can be things like compassion, gratitude, right? A counterbalancing, virtuous thought. Nonviolent communication is a great way. I speak about internal nonviolent communication from the sense that when you have an aversive thought, I'm angry, right? Or there's anger, I should say. Careful not to identify too much, right? Anger is present. Here's anger. Well, it's one thing to see the anger, but then we can also kind of look at, well, what's the anger from? Just take a quick minute to go, well, it's because I didn't like what I read in the news. Well, that's fair. What would I rather see? What would I rather know about? What would I rather see in the world? Well, I'd rather see kindness. I'd rather see compassion. I'd rather see caring. I'd rather see safety. I'd rather see rationality. So we can unpack what's going on, not just only focus on the so-called negative mind state, but to look at what's the counterbalance, right? What would we want otherwise? Gratitude, compassion, equanimity, meditation, things like that, right? We can tune our minds towards something positive, something helpful, something that pivots the quality of our moods and mind states. Coming back to the present moment, actively looking for non-aversive thoughts or stimuli too. Well, the temperature in the room is actually quite nice, right? If I'm feeling sore in the back, but I go, yeah, but the temperature is actually just right, just where I like it. Things like that, right? Sloth and torpor. This is the bowl of water, but it's overgrown with algae. It's kind of stagnant, dead, probably stinks a little bit, right? It's a stagnation of the mind that prevents us from seeing clearly. Usually shows up as tiredness, exhaustion, what have you. Can also be related to difficult emotions. Some of us have to face some really, really powerful stuff in our lives. We just really don't have the energy to face it at the moment. And that manifests in our bodies as tiredness. And in extreme form, for those of us who work with PTSD or CPTSD, there's a state of mind known as dissociation, where you're really checked out, where you're really completely incapable of being present. Those are important things to know, to see what's going on with this mind. In those extreme forms, of course, we encourage people to hopefully seek out appropriate help, professional assistance. Sometimes it's about too much food, overeaten. For those of us who practice intermittent fasting, it might be not enough food, right? Low energy because there's just not enough blood sugar. So we can bring energy to the meditation. We can change our breath pattern, right? We can speed up our breath a little bit. There's a beautiful thing about our breath. We can talk about this so many different ways, that we have the breath, when we don't think about it, it just breathes itself. But we can also control our breath, so to speak, and we can intentionally speed up our breath in doing so. And the heart rate goes up and the mind waves start to change. They start to our minds start to awaken just by bringing the breath, just kind of counting the paces. You can apply mindfulness to the counting and to the breath, etc., and just sort of pick up your energy and do it mindfully, right? You can open your eyes. Our friends in the Zen tradition, they meditate with their eyes open. They'll fix their eyes on a specific point in front of them. They'll kind of get their eyes a little downcast, but open eye meditation is a good way to keep yourself alert when you're feeling pretty sluggish. And there's, of course, mindful movement, right? Qigong, Tai Chi, yoga, Pilates, dance classes, etc. You can apply mindfulness while moving around throughout the day, while walking. Go for a walk. Do it mindfully. Good. The next one is restlessness and remorse, right? This is the agitation of the body. So now we're going back to this bowl of water analogy, right? Imagine the wind is stirring it up. There's a lot of choppiness. You can't see it because the light is dappled across the disturbed water. So as opposed to this restlessness, right, we can notice when it's not present because, of course, we notice the restlessness, and we notice when it's not. And we notice when there is no restlessness by what quality of stillness that we have. This is why sitting still is helpful, right? We're embodying this capacity to be still. We still the body, we can slowly still the mind. Steady the breath, steady the mind. And it takes time. I mentioned a couple of months ago, the physiological aspects of meditation are super important because the stress hormones take a certain amount of time to metabolize through our bodies. It's a bit unfair. When stress hormones hit, they hit within seconds, if not milliseconds. But to get them out of our minds, it takes sometimes 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how well you're, calming the mind, calming the body, etc. So again, this is why we have to be patient with ourselves. We have to give ourselves plenty of space and time to sit, practice, just allow the mind and body to settle in. Of course, the mind is going to wander for the first 15 minutes. Why wouldn't it, right? It's a lot of things working in that direction. Sometimes you can have restlessness without any worry or regret, right? Something in the body is just not feeling great. One of my back pain patterns is it creates a certain amount of tension, and it kind of, the solar plexus just kind of feels tense. So I'm like, am I upset about something? What's going on? I feel like agitated, but it's just, now it's just the muscle is just doing this thing, and it just has a physiological effect where the mind is just like, something's not right. Something's not right. And sometimes there is an emotional element to it too, of course, exactly. There's something about the practice, of coming back to the breath and doing so kindly, especially when we have a lot of restlessness, right? A lot of agitation and worry. I remember this observation, another aspect of the imbalance is that when we're mind wandering, when there's particularly aversive or just, active mind, it's not very polite when it takes control of our minds, right? It's just, I'm going to think about that thing I have that's unresolved in the mind. It doesn't say, hey, can I break in here and make you obsess about what the conversation that you're going to have on Monday with your boss, right? There's no please. There's nothing. And yet when we're consciously attending to this moment of mind wandering, right? We can't do so with an argument, right? We can't really. It's just not fair. It's just not fair. The mind will just take control of us sometimes. So that self-kindness is, again, important, right? Whenever we're attending to our minds and we're coming back to our breath. Some of the antidotes for restlessness and remorse are, they're a bit mixed, right? Sometimes a bit of activity might help with that, right? Again, mindful movement for people who are feeling particularly agitated, because sometimes there's a pent-up energy to move the body. So mindful movement is also a good way to help dispel some of that energy. Sometimes steadying the breath, like I said, steadying the eyes can also be helpful. One of the things about that focusing the eye bit is that we've stopped feeding extra information into our mind, so it helps, again, pivot the mind. I noticed that when I was meditating, eyes closed, and the mind was wandering a lot, I noticed that my eyes were just moving around in the eye socket. So even if your eyes are closed, you can just notice that and just be like, okay, let's just still the eyes as well. And that's been helpful for me sometimes too. And then doubt and uncertainty, the last on the list. The analogy here is the muddy water, right? The bowl of water, we can't see through it because it's just full of mud, dirt. Again, can't see to the bottom very clearly. Everything is obscured. Now, this is not about, they call this the practice killer, meaning that, when you start to doubt what you're doing, doubt what's happening, doubt your ability, right? This isn't about, it can affect our practice, it can stop us from practicing, but this is not about removing skepticism or setting aside our wisdom. So if you doubt something in the situation, if you doubt the teacher, if you doubt the style, if you doubt the space or whatever, don't necessarily ignore that either, right? This is not about removing skepticism. The salience of our practice is supposed to take precedence in all cases. This is the state of mind where we're talking about uncertainty, kind of wavering or indecision. It's about coming to a crossroad and not knowing which way to go. What am I supposed to do here? That kind of thing. The mind might be wavering back and forth between alternatives and then caught in decision paralysis. We don't do anything. Like I said, there's the doubt in our own abilities too, right? There's those of us who work with self-esteem issues as part of our practice. So we want to be curious about these doubts. Buddhism encourages a lot of investigation and curiosity, cultivation of wisdom. Maybe there's something to learn. Maybe there's some place to grow. So as an antidote, it's very helpful to reflect on what went well. Empower yourself with curiosity and investigation. You're allowed to ask questions. Develop some patience with yourself as well. Remember, you're not perfect. We start where we are. We show up in our practice, wherever we are in life, whoever we are. Take it from there. I've encouraged patience with the practice, patience with our sits, etc. Simplify sometimes, right? Stick to the foundations. Stick to what you know works well. When you're ready to learn a new technique or a new practice, you'll be there for it, right? You don't have to push it. You don't have to force yourself through anything. Another thing that's helpful is spiritual friends, right? This is why our ability to communicate with each other, to hear other perspectives on what their practice is like, to know, oh, I'm just like them, right? I'm experiencing the same thing as them. And check in with other teachers too. I'm so over the moon that we've been able to bring in such a wide variety of teachers into PIMC over the past year. I've been craving expanded perspectives for years. And I love it, right? We can ask different questions of different people and get different perspectives. We don't have to have them tell us what to do, but just hearing somebody else's story of their journey is unbelievably useful, helpful, important. Can help us deal with this doubt and uncertainty. Now, I had a conversation with my son yesterday about this practice of the hindrances, and he wanted me to kind of give him a high-level synopsis of what I was doing. And I talked about hindrances, and he says the word hindrances has a really interesting connotation to it, right? It's like something, and if I see something in my life as a hindrance, right, there's an automatic desire to like defeat the hindrance. The Buddha uses all kinds of different languages, and granted, we're talking about an ancient language that's no longer spoken in the general public. It's still chanted and taught into modernity, but it's a different language from a different culture, a different time. So we often find ourselves doing our level best to kind of translate a lot of these words that the Buddha has given us that have stood the test of time. Another way to translate hindrances is covering, right? That there's something that's filtering our view, right? So just the way we approach this concept of, a hindrance might be relevant to our practice, so that we're not, again, being careful about this mental combat. But even so, right, what's interesting is that, say for example, I'm obsessing about that chocolate eclair again, right? And there's a choice to be made. I become aware of it. Okay, I'm still thinking about this pastry. And the Buddha encourages us to change the mind, bring the attention to it, direct it towards something skillful. And my son goes, well, isn't that at heart an aversion? Isn't that an aversive thought? I'm like, damn you, you're so smart. So I think so. So I did a little more research into this idea, and I was like, well, think about it. The Buddha makes a distinction between skillful desire and unskillful desire. Is there such a thing as skillful aversion and unskillful aversion? And the Buddha doesn't frame it that way, not that I could find. Ajahn Thanissaro does a good talk about that online. I did listen to a talk from Ajahn Thanissaro about, we have to make choices. We are going to accept some things and reject others. There's also a lot of other words that the Buddha uses, things like renunciation, letting go, restraint, right? These are all at their heart, if you really think about it, a form of no. There is a subtle aversion to it. There's a choice to be made. Yep, nope, yep, nope, right? So I'm making the case that there is such a thing as a skillful type of aversion. Now, to kind of bring it all around, when we look at this activity of the mind, we're being intentionally, we have skillful craving, we have skillful aversion. We're watching this mind do all of its machinations, and then we're also getting involved in it too. We're making choices. We're co-creating the experience. So here we are, part of the whole conversation. And in that, we realize our capacity for choice gives us a little bit more agency as to how we show up for our own selves and then how we show up for each other. There's a term from Sanskrit that they use called neti. It's a very closely related meditation practice. Not this, not that. Neti. So the thoughts come up, not this, not that, not this, not that, right? Gentle, we're not adding any more to the experience than is absolutely necessary, but we're also noticing, this mind is making choices, this mind is creating the experience. So, hindrances, mind activity, showing up for the world. Again, like I said, I've thrown a lot of words out here. There's a lot of exercise, a lot of things to consider. And all of us show up to our practice, who we are, where we are at any given moment. Sometimes the mind just naturally settles itself. We don't have to do a lot. We don't have to apply a lot of effort. Like I said, sometimes just the physiological aspect of just sitting still and being quiet is enough to change our embodied experience of stress. And sometimes the mind just settles itself down. Sometimes it needs a little help. When we look at the quality of these thoughts, of course, we're noticing the impermanence, the arising and passing away, the change throughout the trajectory of our sit. I started off feeling this way, now I'm feeling that way. underneath all of that, there's of course the friction that we feel with all of these thoughts, the liking, the disliking. Sometimes that leads to more intense grasping, clinging. So we can look at the connection between our thoughts and how we feel about them, our suffering, so to speak, our friction, our dissatisfaction. It can be subtle, it can be very coarse. And the impersonal nature of it too. All of these hindrances are universal. Everyone sitting in this room has to face these hindrances in one way or another. So it's a shared experience. Even though we don't necessarily need to take these things personally, we are sort of personally responsible for attending to them. This person, such as we are, such as we're either have been trained or are currently engaged in ongoing training. Is given a set of choices as to how to respond to this moment. And these thoughts don't define us because of the fact that they change. They're not necessarily the only thing that define who we are. We get to change our hearts, we get to change our minds over time. We can encourage cultivation, wisdom. We can cultivate wisdom, kindness, compassion, equanimity. We talk about sharing the merits of our practice. And to me, what that means is how I show up in the world, how I interact with other people. What is this mind doing? And, I have my moments. There's still plenty of reactivity to be calmed in this mind. But I knew it. I see it. I think all of us know it and see it in our own ways now. We can show up differently. We can spread this capacity. We have effects on each other by creating these spaces and communities and environments where we can kind of, hopefully, develop a little bit more sanity. A little sanity inside, share it with others, a little sanity outside. Now I know it's a minute or two after the noon hour here. Trying to decide let's end with the chant. We'll do it in English. May all beings be happy. Let's chant that 3 times. Followed by sadhu, which means well done, may it be thus. May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you all for your time and attention.